Okay, Neil, whenever you're ready.
Okay, Christy, well, I'll go ahead and kick this off. I want to welcome everybody to today's webinar, part of a monthly series of webinars that's put on in partnership by the Tennessee Urban Forestry Council and the University of Tennessee's Residential and Community Forestry Working Group. There's been a lot of people that have hands in this, and I've been real pleased to see the quality of the seminar so far, and I know you're going to be really pleased with our speaker today. But our whole purpose, to be frank with you, is that we want to bring you on a regular basis speakers and topics that are relevant to you and to help you do a better job of growing a healthier and more productive urban forest in Tennessee and beyond. So we're looking for some critiques, ideas for improvement, speakers, topics to make this more meaningful to you. And you can provide those comments electronically, email, or in the chat box. So let us hear from you. So once again, thank you for attending. And at this time, I'm going to turn it over to our next moderator to talk about CEUs.
So I do want to remind everyone, if you signed up and you need credit for this, for ISA or pesticide certification, please make sure that your full name is showing so that we can give you proper credit. To do that, please just follow these instructions and change your name and make sure your whole name is showing. It looks like almost everybody looks pretty good, but please double check on that so that we can make sure you get credit. And my email is christyak@utk.edu. I'm the one that emailed you this morning, so if you have trouble changing your name, just shoot me an email and we'll get it taken care of. Thanks.
Good morning or afternoon, all. I would like to welcome you to another TUFC Residential and Community Forestry webinar. I would like to introduce Dr. Paul Reese, who obtained his BS and MS from Oregon State University and his educational doctorate from Carson Newman. He is currently the Director of Graduate Certificate in Urban Forestry Programs at Oregon State University and also an adjunct professor in the Department of Forestry, Wildlife, and Fisheries at the University of Tennessee. He has worked for over 30 years in natural resources and urban forestry. He is a friend to all and is a current board member on Trees Knoxville. All welcome, Dr. Reese. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Let's see. I need to share screen and it says only one participant can share. Can you, Christy, up? There we go. Got it. Okay. Well, thank you to the Tennessee Urban Forest Council for inviting me to speak today. As Sharon indicated, I'm Paul Reese, and I have a whole lot of different affiliations. See a couple of them there. What I'm going to talk about today is rethinking trees, leveraging the lesser appreciated benefits of urban trees. Now, as a fairly recent transplant to Tennessee, I thought maybe I'd take a few minutes to introduce myself in a little bit more detail. As Sharon said, I'm on the faculty of Oregon State. Actually, my undergraduate degrees were from Ohio State. Trust me, it's real confusing to go from one OSU to another. But I also have a small consulting business where I work with nonprofit organizations. And actually, theoretically, I'm half retired. So I spent a lot of time hiking in the Smokies. So hence the photo of me on the hiking trail there. But I've been living in Tennessee most of the time for about the last three and a half years, and still getting to know the state. And I really have been a member of the TUFC and really enjoyed the opportunity to share some thoughts with you today. So today's presentation, really, I have three kind of objectives for it. One, I want to explore this idea of rethinking how we communicate the benefits of trees. I want to discuss with you a number of research studies that shows what I would call the lesser understood or lesser appreciated values of trees, and then examine what rethinking trees might actually look like. And I'll give credit to Knoxville urban forester Casey Krause, who gave me the inspiration for this particular talk and the title of it. So thank you, Casey. Before I get into the main talk today, I want to recap another talk I've given in the past. I don't know that I've given it to the TUFC, but I have, whoops, sorry about that. I have given this talk on how to talk trees. And basically the idea between how to talk trees is that there's a communications triangle that exists, and that if we're going to effectively communicate trees, we need to navigate this triangle. And that triangle consists of a key message, a target audience to reach with that message, and then the proper tool of how to get that message across. But this particular talk today is really about this idea of the key messages. And it's going to focus specifically on what messages are we using to communicate urban forestry and tree concepts, and are they really the right ones? Well, you might be familiar with the saying, trees are good. In fact, there's even a website that ISA has. It's their consumer information series that explains to people why trees are good. And I would think that for most people, they would generally consider trees to be good. Some people may not like trees, but they know that trees give us a lot of benefits. And those benefits are really things that trees provide to us, like clean air and clean water and so forth, the list that you see on the screen here. But there's really another set of benefits. And I'd say trees are not only good, trees are really great, actually, because not only do they provide us with benefits, but they do things for us. So they provide services, what we might call ecosystem services. Now that phrase ecosystem services has been around probably for about 20 years-ish now. It's really defined as the benefits that humans obtain from the functions of our ecosystem, from the direct or indirect contributions that trees make to our human well-being. But I would argue we really haven't done a good job of communicating to people the extent of this information. Because I think people generally know that trees are good. They generally know that we get clean air and clean water from trees. But I don't think they have a clue about how great trees really are, or the type of things that trees do for us. Hence, the reason for this talk today. So what do we mean by rethinking trees? Well, if you look at a dictionary definition, the word rethink means to think again about a plan, an idea, or a system in order to change or improve it. So what I would argue is that we need to rethink how we advocate for trees, how we describe the benefits to trees, and even how we communicate with people about trees. Now, I'd like to, for a moment, unpack the photo that's on this screen. So I took this photo about 2 weeks ago, and it is of not a street tree, but a yard tree. It's about 10, 12 feet off the curb. And notice the first thing I want you to notice, obviously, probably the first thing you noticed is that the tree has been topped. Okay, so we have an improper tree care practice going on here. But take a look at the sign next to it. The sign says, "Slow down, we love our children." The idea is the people that own this house, and assuming own the tree as well, want you to slow down because that tree's close to the road and they're concerned about perhaps their children darting out into the street. But from the Department of Mixed Messages, take a look at the swings that are hanging from this tree and what's been done to the tree. So the tree's been topped and there's 2 swings, and those rope swings are about 2 to 3 inches from the edge of a stub cut of a tree. So translate this to, we love our children and you should too, but we don't love them enough to actually care for the tree or to keep our children safe from that tree. So what this tells me is people have a lack of understanding about what good tree care is all about and what urban forestry is about, and really about how we keep people safe. So in looking at this picture, we would think people love trees, they love their children, but they don't know enough that not only are these people hoping to keep their children safe on one hand, they're actually undermining that desire on another. All right, so if we're going to communicate the benefits of trees, I think we first need to understand people's connections to them. Now, people have a lot of different connections to trees, and the connections that they might have are anything from they value the trees that are on their property to they like the trees in their neighborhood, to they like to walk in the woods or whatever. But they have a lot of different connections that we in the urban forestry community really need to pay attention to if we're going to communicate with them, not to them, but with them about trees. And I think we mostly do that through the power of stories. I think that one of the most effective ways to educate people about trees is to help them understand the importance of trees through telling a story. So I'd like to take that opportunity to tell you a story. As a much younger urban forester, I served on the city forester staff in Cincinnati, Ohio. And yes, that's me to the right there, many, many years ago. It's about the earliest photograph I could find of myself in the field. One day I answered the office phone. Of course, this was well before cell phones. And there was a voice of an elderly woman on the other end. "I need you to come out here and grind this stump in front of my house," she demanded. So I asked for her address, and I told her at that time we only had one stump grinder on contract, and we'd get to it when we had enough stumps to grind in her area of the city. "No, it needs to be done today," she told me. Well, I found this statement a bit odd because it wasn't like the street tree was hazardous or anything, because it had already been removed. And stump removal didn't typically involve such urgency, I thought. So I politely told her we couldn't do it today, but that we put it on our list. "No, I would like it done immediately," she responded again. Now, at this point, I sensed we were talking past each other and there was more to this story. So I asked, "Ma'am, why is it so urgent that we remove this stump today?" "Because there's a school bus in front of my house and the kids jump up on the stump and make faces at me," she exclaimed. You see, there was this connection. It really wasn't the stump that bothered her. It was the school children's behavior she had a problem with. The stump was just the proxy, the ancillary to that story. So this wasn't really a connection to trees I would have thought of had I not dug deeper into the situation. She figured if the stump went away, her problem with the school children would go away as well. So we don't always know what people's connections are or what people think about the trees when we're trying to converse with them about their benefits. So with that, I'd like to share 3 key points of this talk today. And if you don't absorb anything else from my presentation, these are the 3 points that you need to take home. And these are 3 stories that I think you need to learn to tell in your own community as well. First, trees are a matter of life and death. Now, that sounds a bit dramatic, but I'll explain it in a minute. Second, trees make and save us money, and theoretically, we all like that. And then 3, trees can make or break our communities. I'm going to share 9 research studies with you, but for each one I share, there's really dozens more. I've just sort of cherry-picked some interesting ones that I would like to talk to you about today. Let's start off with this rather provocative title, "Trees Are a Matter of Life or Death." As my friend researcher Jeff Donovan would say, and I heard him say recently, this is not a figure of speech or a metaphor. It's a fact, a matter of science. Our challenge is, how do we get community decision makers to realize this and to act accordingly? That trees improve people's health and literally save their lives. The first study I'd like to tell you about is urban trees influence birth outcomes. So in this study conducted by Jeff Donovan and others, they looked at the influence of tree canopy within 50 meters of a pregnant woman's home and discovered that women were less likely to have underweight babies. Now, if you're not into science too much or the medical science, you might not know this, but premature underweight births typically contribute to many future health problems in small children. Now, there is an interesting twist to this particular study, and that is there's something that's known as the nice trees, nice neighborhood effect or problem, in that income, race, and education are major drivers of public health outcomes as well. And you can never be certain that if, results like this are solely due to tree canopy. But the researchers in this study did their best to control for all these other factors. Understand that we're not saying that trees cause better birth weights. We're saying that trees contribute or influence to avoiding underweight birth outcomes. In the second study from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, researchers measured dynamic stress responses using ambulatory heart rate monitoring. They had participants walk past vacant lots before and after greening efforts and measured their heart rates. They found that being in view of a greened vacant lot decreased heart rate significantly more than having a view of a non-greened vacant lot. This reduction in heart rate does suggest that there's a biological link between urban greening and reduction of acute stress in human beings. And again, I should mention that Christy sent you a handout this morning that had all of these research studies listed on them. The third human health study that I'd like to talk about is one that relates to emerald ash borer. Now, you might be somewhat familiar with emerald ash borer in that we have it in at least parts of Tennessee. It was first discovered in 2002, and typically trees die within 2 to 5 years of infection. In this case, the researchers looked at the public health effects of EAB in terms of cardiovascular and lower respiratory diseases. Tree loss from EAB was associated with increased human mortality, and this relationship increased in size and significance as the EAB infestation continued. So simply put, the more trees died, the more people died. Over 6 years in 15 states, researchers found 15,000 more deaths from cardiovascular disease and 6,000 more deaths from lower respiratory disease, all related to emerald ash borer. As I said, there are many more studies that I could have shown you. In fact, here is a list of all the ways that trees influence our health. Many of these, of course, have economic implications as well. But if you look at all of the different findings on this page, each one of those has multiple research studies behind them that show the influence or the impact of trees on these health issues. So to summarize this first point that I want to make today, that trees are a matter of life and death, is that there's a lot of research out there that shows that more trees mean less stress or better birth outcomes, and fewer trees means more increased deaths. So that if we let them, trees can really help us live longer and healthier lives. And that is a public health issue that no community leader, that no city official, that no elected official should ignore. Number 2, trees make and save us money. We all like to make money and we like to save money. It's human nature. But how many of us understand exactly how trees do that for us? Now, I often at this point will throw out some statistics, depending on what city I'm speaking in or what state I'm speaking in, that relates to things like iTree studies that have shown how much value and ecosystem services that trees produce compared to the value or the cost of maintaining that urban forest. And it's always $1 to $2 to $3 to $4 more. And those are better returns than you can get in almost any investment that you're going to find, the stock market or anywhere else. The idea behind this set of research studies is that trees allow us to avoid spending money because of the services that they provide to us. So here's 3 studies that show that. The first one, researchers looked at 10 megacity metropolitan areas, and we define a megacity by over 10 million in population. So Los Angeles is the only one that qualified in this particular study. And this international team of researchers found that trees provide each city with $500 million worth of ecosystem benefits. Now, if we place these results on a larger scale of socioeconomic systems, it makes it evident to what extent that our natural systems support our individual community well-being by providing all of those ecosystem values for free. Bringing it closer to home here in Tennessee and to a certainly much smaller city, let's look at a study that focuses on individuals as well. This is from Eric Bridges, who gave us the TUFC webinar last month. Trees provide economic benefits not just to cities, but to individual homeowners. A real estate study from 2001 to 2005 in Lakeland, Tennessee, near Memphis, found that canopy cover on individual lots was not as valuable as the canopy adjacent to the property, which had a significant positive impact on the home price sales. And those higher property values then in turn led to increased municipal tax revenues for the city. So the statistics that show the benefit of trees on a particular lot goes back even into the early 1980s, as far as research being done that looks at the value of home prices of a house that had trees versus a similar house that didn't have trees. The next study illustrates that we lose money by not having trees. In this particular research, we covered 97 cities that were home to 59 million people. Researchers assessed tree and developed land cover and analyzed how much the urban tree cover reduced the summer air temperatures, and then in turn reduced the heat-related mortality and morbidity and the electricity consumption. It might surprise you to know that in this study, 78% of urban dwellers were in neighborhoods that had less than 20% tree cover. So some of their findings were that the current relationships between this temperature and the health outcomes meant that the urban tree cover helps us avoid somewhere between 245 and 346 deaths annually, depending on the city. Now, for the 97 cities studied, this total economic value of avoided health costs and increased electricity consumption comes to between 1.3 and 2.9 billion dollars. If you were to extrapolate this out, however, to the entire US population, you would estimate that urban tree cover annually supplies heat reduction services of between 5 and 12 billion dollars. Yes, I said billion. Let me repeat that. The heat reduction services that trees provide is worth between 5 and 12 billion dollars in the US. So the kind of the benefits of the economic health ideas are that the urban forest is part of our infrastructure, and it's infrastructure that appreciates, unlike most of the rest of the city infrastructure, which depreciates. And it's true that economic arguments have a lot of sway with elected officials. But as I said, these are related to health, and they're related to energy and to many other aspects. I think what we have to be careful with in these sorts of statistics and in dealing with these sorts of arguments with community leaders is not to let it become an either-or situation, because it needs to be both. I remember having a conversation with one person who told me that their mayor said they could either plant trees or they could buy another police car. And I said, that's a real false choice. It's not an either or situation, because we know that planting trees has an impact on crime. And I'll get to that story in a minute. But we have to be very vigilant when we advocate for the urban forest to help people understand that trees are not an end. They're a means to an end. They're a means to economic health. They're a means to improving human health, not an end in itself. I mean, consider this. You can't plant a tree and only get one benefit from it. It's an impossibility. When you plant a tree, you get all the whole suite of benefits that that tree provides to you. And those are incalculable for the most part. Number three, the third key point that I want to make today is that trees can make or break our communities. Now, the prevailing thought here is that research has shown that trees correlate to positive social outcomes in our communities, and the lack of trees correlates to negative outcomes in our communities as well. The first study I'd like to talk about is the connection between trees and crime, and we'll go back to this point of the emerald ash borer. And this particular study comes from one of my former hometowns, Cincinnati, Ohio. The study investigated the association between EAB and crime using an experimental approach. They compared crime from 11 different classes of crime and census blocks that were infested with EAB, and then crime on blocks that were not infested with the EAB from a period of 2005 to 2014. Now, they accounted for demographic and biological differences between the infested and uninfested block groups using a weighting system. What they found was that EAB infestation was significantly and positively associated with relative increases in crime in all but 4 of those 11 categories. Again, we're not saying that trees cause a decrease in crime. We're saying is that trees have an influence and contribute to the crime rates. The second study under this community area, and again, there are very many of these, relates to this idea of that the lack of trees is an environmental justice issue. A 108 city study released last year in 2020 showed the relationship between present day patterns of inequitable exposure to heat and the racist housing practice of redlining. Now, redlining was that practice of denying mortgages and economic investment to lower income and communities of color in major metropolitan cities well across the United States. What the researchers found is that the effects of past redlining practices correlated to present day increased urban heat islands, meaning less trees and higher urban temperatures. The urban heat island effect can cause temperatures to vary by as much as 10 degrees within a single urban area. So this study further examines the relationship between present day patterns of inequity and the historical housing practices. Finally, lest you think this is only a US issue, it certainly is worldwide. I thought maybe I'd throw in a study from somewhere else in the world. This is from Malaysia, where researchers explored the fact that trees were central to the quality of life in the community. Now, I could give a whole lecture on the quality of life benefits of trees, but just to highlight this one study that explored the various aspects of people having access to the green infrastructure in their community. And they surveyed people as to what that afforded to them. And the results were that the findings suggest that participation in physical, leisure, and social activities triggered a sense of relaxation, comfort, and satisfaction. In other words, the trees were where people flocked to. The trees were where people recreated. The trees were where people wanted to be. So this idea of trees and community relates to not only the individuals themselves, but how individuals interact with the overall community. So to summarize this community health benefits, I think it's one way to think about it is that trees provide a sense of place and belonging to our community, and that they frame our gathering places, and they are where people want to go to recreate, where people want to go to congregate. And unfortunately, the benefits of urban trees really hasn't historically fallen equitably on all parts of our community. And this issue of environmental justice, I think, is gaining a lot of more visibility in the last couple of years. And it's certainly something that needs to continue to be addressed. Finally, the impact of trees on people, I think, makes for compelling stories because people can relate to that. So whether it's the negative stories like what I mentioned, the woman and the stump, or the positive stories of people planting trees as a memorial to loved ones, for example, on the greenway near my house. These are all ways that people connect with trees and where trees become part of kind of the fabric of our community. So these are the 9 research studies that I just wanted to highlight under these 3 categories of trees are a matter of life and death, trees make and save us money, and trees can make or break our communities. These are the messages that I believe that we, as in the urban forestry community, need to be communicating about trees. And again, let me remind you that these are just a few of the studies. And yes, I've sort of cherry-picked these, but I've tried to give you a very broad swath of the research that's out there. And I mentioned to you earlier that early in my career, I was on the city forestry staff in Cincinnati, Ohio. We had none of this. We had a hunch. We knew anecdotally that trees were good, but we didn't necessarily have all the data that's available to us today. So my challenge to you really is to delve into this research further, to look at it, to read the studies, to read the research summaries, and think about how you could use that research in ways that advocate for and advance the urban forestry in the communities where you are. But as I said, trees are not just good, they're great, but they really aren't perfect. So let me add a 10th study. And this 10th study is a fairly recent one as well, by some colleagues of mine who looked at the disservices that urban trees provide. Now, we talked about in ecosystem services, but we have to understand that there are drawbacks to urban trees, particularly if we don't manage them properly. And the point of one of these researchers are that urban foresters sometimes make an uncritical assertion that everybody likes trees. Therefore, we should just plant them everywhere. But their point is that urban forestry decision-making must take into account disservices. Otherwise, there will be unintended consequences for our communities if we just focus on the good, because there are trade-offs in urban forestry. Excuse me. Ultimately, I think these 10 research studies show that the argument for trees is really all about health in one form or another, whether it's our human health in trees as a matter of life or death, or whether it's economic health in terms of trees making and save us money, or whether it's in terms of community health and making our communities viable, vital, and livable places for us to not just live, but work and play as well. At this point, what I'd like to do is I'm going to go, before I finish my talk on that, I'm going to go actually ask for questions, because I'm going to finish my talk in a few minutes here with some practical ideas about how we do that. But I'd like to see what your thoughts are about rethinking trees in terms of these 9 or 10 studies that I've shared with you. So if you would like to ask any questions, put them into the chat, that would be great. And if not, I will actually invite. I'll actually ask you some, and I'm a college professor, so I have the license to do that. How many of you have tried the human health approach with your city council? When did tree topping stop? Thank you, Donna. Did anyone know the history? When did tree topping start, rather? That's an interesting question. I do not know the history of tree topping. I do know that it probably relates somewhat to humans' desire to control nature. But I will tell you that it's 1970s when Dr. Alex Shigo proved that topping was bad for trees. So in other words, we've known for 50 years that tree topping is bad, and yet we still have it. So let's see, question. Hi, Meg. What are your thoughts about reimagining trees as the natural climate solution in messaging? Are people open to the idea? Well, the signature blocks that people have in the bottom of their emails actually used to have a quote on the bottom of mine, Meg, that said, urban forests are the front line of defense for climate change. And I think that it goes to speak to the issue that trees are everywhere we are. And yes, it's important to preserve the trees that are out in the wilderness or the Amazon rainforest or wherever. But if we're not doing a good job of managing the trees right around us, how can we expect people to do that other places? I don't know. So I think that certainly trees are a function, even in our own communities, of addressing climate change issues. To bring it even closer to home, Meg, I think I might point out that the most common source of pollution in our cities is usually the tailpipes of our automobiles, and so that's a reason to have street trees. That's the reason to plant trees along our highways, because you're mitigating pollution right there at the source. Let's see. Neil says, what messages would developers best respond to? Well, developers would best respond to an economic message, primarily, Neil, because it's the bottom line for most developers. There are some developers that are interested in the triple bottom line, right? Economic, environmental, and social. So I think it's a matter of finding out what resonates with them. In Central Oregon, many years ago, I worked with a developer on a infill development that we looked at how to preserve these trees on a 7-acre site. And we actually ended up making a video of it. I think I might have showed that at a previous meeting of the Southern chapter of ISA a number of years back. But the idea is that trees on a property can increase the resale value. So if you can convince a developer to leave trees during the development process, you're automatically going to get an instant economic boost from that. Of course, it does take more to work around those. So that does factor in. How would I, Janice says, how would I best present the importance of trees to developers that want to clear land and take out mature trees in the area? Again, I think you have to do it as, well, there's several ways to do that. First of all, there's really 3 methods, and Meg could quote these for you because I know she knows them. Education, incentives, and regulation. I think you have to have all 3. You have to educate developers about the value and importance of trees. You have to provide incentives for changing setback rules and everything else to allow for more trees. And then finally, you have to have regulations that treat trees as a vital part of the infrastructure as well. Okay, I think that's good. Let me go back to my presentation, and I'll go finish off with some practical ideas, and then we can take more questions. So what does it mean to rethink trees? What do we mean by that? Well, I think, first of all, we have to connect with people where they are in their understanding. You've probably seen this rather amusing type of thing, internet meme, I guess, that's gone around. If trees were as popular as gave off Wi-Fi, then we'd be planting them everywhere. Too bad they only produce oxygen that we breathe. The trees, obviously, Wi-Fi is a quality of life issue to us, but then so is oxygen. I think we have to help people understand and connect with how trees are relevant to them, especially in ways that they didn't think of before. So one of the ideas today of me presenting these lesser understood or lesser underappreciated benefits to you is that to help your thinking in terms of how we message, how we help people make the connection with trees. Because if you start to say, try this at the next time you're in conversation with somebody about trees, try out this line. Have you considered that trees are a matter of life and death? Because I guarantee most people haven't. They take trees for granted, and that isn't an idea that has necessarily connected with them. And then finally, I think we need to position trees as essential. And I think that one of the things that this whole pandemic has had perhaps an unintended consequence for us is that we have been talking more and more about what is essential or what that means. And, I think that the pandemic and trees actually have a lot in common, because, one of the reasons we're having such difficulty dealing with the coronavirus is that we don't have the resiliency in our systems that perhaps we should have. And same thing with trees, is we don't take trees seriously enough to be able to reap all the benefits that they provide for us. So I'd argue that we need to get the point across that trees are essential for our health. They're an essential part of a city livability, and they're essential city service to maintain public safety, for example, because urban forestry is really all about managing for safety and resiliency. And if we're going to think in terms of what's essential, I can't think of anything more essential in our communities than a tree. But, that last year in 2020, we went through a lot of public debate about what was essential and whether or not we should lock things down and prevent people from congregating and so forth. And in that whole discussion of trying to define what is essential, some businesses were declared not essential. And quite frankly, I have trouble with that, because if you have a job that's supporting you or supporting your family, that job's pretty essential. You know, this whole notion that some jobs are essential and some jobs aren't, I don't buy it. But, you know, we have, you know, there's one, I won't name the state, but there's one governor that tried to dictate what you could buy within a single store and what you couldn't, as far as they said you could only buy things that are essential. You know, I don't want to give a politician the power to say to make that term as essential. Because here, I'll tell you what, can you name one thing that not a single state restricted or prohibited during this pandemic? If you guessed lottery tickets, you guessed right. So how do we make trees as essential as lottery tickets in our community? That, I believe, is part of our challenge in the urban forestry community. So rethinking trees, leveraging the lesser appreciated benefits of urban trees. What does leveraging look like? It's really about value. It's about helping community leaders and decision makers understand the value of trees and how to capitalize on those values for the benefits of society. So, you know, in Knoxville, for example, research has shown that there's a $3.44 return for every dollar that it spends on the urban forest, and that the public portion of the urban forest alone, that would be parks and street trees, has a $1.2 million price tag. It's statistics like those that get people's attention, but you can't give them to them in a vacuum. You have to, I think, put it in a story. You have to put it in a context that leads people to act, that compels them to act. I think if we are going to rethink how we communicate the benefits of trees, we can't stop with communication. We need to really push to the right here in our efforts, because communication really leads to awareness. But the next part of communication is really connection. We have to have people gain some understanding and reach an appreciation for trees by connecting to them. And then we really need to engage people. Engagement means having a deeper understanding, because it's really engaging with trees that will lead to behavior change. You know, in my lifetime, there's kind of two things I think that I have seen complete turnarounds on, and that is recycling and smoking. Those two things in the 1960s and 70s were much different. You know, smoking was widely, you know, wasn't really criticized, really wasn't restricted at all. And recycling wasn't something anybody did. Today, smoking is on the decline, and recycling is a bit more ubiquitous, not completely, but a bit more. And I think people have changed their behaviors. So how do we get them to change their behaviors? How do we get them to not top trees? How do we get them to not clear the land to make the land fit the development instead of the development fit the existing land? So how do we find ways to rethink the value of trees? We do it through engagement. We do it through looking for that behavior change, because it's there that we have our impact. It's really in terms of moving from communication to connection to engagement that we as urban foresters are going to be able to advance our efforts, increase our canopy, and provide for the health and welfare of our citizens. Remember, I opened this presentation with telling you a story about the elderly lady who had an urgent request to remove her stump. Here's the remainder of that story. After she told me that the kids at the school bus stop stood on the stump and made faces to her, I did my best to empathize with her. But I somewhat inconsiderately told her the problem should be handled by the school rather than by my stump grinding crew. She remained pretty insistent that the stump needed to be removed. Now, something in my gut told me there was more to this story, so I gently probed a bit. "Ma'am, I'm sorry you're upset about this," I asked. "When did we remove this tree?" "Yes, I could have looked this information up, but I didn't really want to put the phone down to check." With her voice starting to crack, she replied, "The tree was damaged in a storm and had to be removed about 6 weeks ago, about the same time my husband passed away." You see, her real connection to this stump was not that so much the school kids, but that it reminded her of the immense loss she felt over the death of her husband. The school children were only one part of the story. Had I not taken the time to really listen and to dig deeper, I would have missed the real connection. And I expressed my sympathies and promised to do my best to reroute the stump grinding crew and get the stump ground well ahead of when it normally would have. And I did. You see, her connection to trees was an emotional one and not one that research is very good at quantifying. So we have to always remember that people are connected to trees in many, many ways. And it's really up to us to use that connection to help educate them and to help turn them into advocates for the urban forest. In summary, I think that if we're going to rethink trees, that will require us to help people make connections and for us to understand connections that they already have, as well as the ones that they might not immediately make. And again, there's a staggering amount of research out there. I've just given you 10 of them, and I could have picked a complete different 10 and still made the same presentation to you. I encourage you, spend the time, look at these research studies, figure out what they're saying, and connect the dots, put them together. Because it's really up to us in the urban forestry community to leverage that research to advance our own urban forestry efforts in our communities across Tennessee and beyond. Well, thanks for attending today, and I hope you've got some more questions, and I'd really love to get into some conversation with you. Here are my 2 email addresses. If you'd like to carry the conversation on further, or if you have any other questions beyond today, I'd be glad to try to answer those. So let me stop screen sharing here and go back to see if there are any questions. Neil says, Tennessee has over 45 tree boards. Can you suggest strategies to how they can help their local community rethink trees? Absolutely, Neil. And I've spent a lot of my career working with tree boards. In fact, if you're not familiar with it, I'd draw your attention to a resource called Tree Board University. If you go to treeboardu.org, you'll find a lot of resources there. I think in part it comes down to communications and marketing. It comes down to raising the public visibility of tree boards. You see, a tree board is a form of participatory democracy. In other words, people that serve on tree boards are actually serving to participate in the livability of their community, or advancing the livability of their community. And I would encourage tree boards to think of it in that context of how individual volunteers can contribute to making their community better and to increasing the canopy that provides all those ecosystem services to us. Other questions? Meg says, in a nonprofit world, staff often wears many hats. How can we convince our bosses and boards that we should be spending more time on communications and outreach? And that's a good question, Meg. I think there's probably a lot of different answers to that. There's a book I read early in my career. Some of you probably read it, called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. Came out in the early 80s, mid 80s, perhaps. And one of his 7 habits is what he calls sharpening the saw. And the analogy he gives it is, if you don't stop and sharpen the saw, sometimes it takes a lot more time to cut because the saw is not sharp. And his point was to step back and invest time in things like learning and development and training and so forth. I would encourage you to think about, when you have a program like planting trees, it always needs an education component. It always needs a public outreach component to it, because there's nothing more irresponsible than planting a tree without having any mechanism for that tree to be cared for, or without having people realize the important value of that tree. I mean, we have million tree campaigns all over the US, but we've never had a million pruning campaign or a million tree care campaign. It's just not as sexy. But what we need to think about is it's not an either or situation. We should be planting trees, and we should be caring for them, and we should be managing them. And it takes communication and outreach. Otherwise, those trees are going to die. You know, those trees are going to be a wasted resource. You know, for the longest time, I had you know, I've been involved with Arbor Day presentations for most of my career, and I always would get calls from people and said, "Can you give me some seedlings so I can pass them out on Arbor Day?" And my answer is no, because what happens is most of those seedlings die on the kitchen counter when the kid takes it home. They don't get planted, or if they do get planted, they might get planted underneath a power line. You know, giving out trees without having a mechanism to educate people about how to properly care for them, you know, I think it's irresponsible. And we need that education component. So you know, you can look at it in a cost benefit ratio. You can look at it in a return on investment. If we're going to invest money in trees, we need to have the ability to ensure the longevity of those trees, and we do that through educating people to care for them. Okay. Let's see, next question. Do benefits increase with native species, or does it matter more that any species is present? I didn't really delve into that research-wise. The native versus non-native debate is one that's gone on for a long time in the urban forestry profession, and probably will continue to go on. You know, I don't think it's, again, a matter of native or non-native. It's a matter of both. There are times when a native species is appropriate. There's times when a non-native one is as well. And I think that people need to understand that the prevailing message should be right tree, right place, that you should match the tree to the site requirements rather than the other way around. And I don't think there's necessarily, I haven't seen research that necessarily says native trees provide any more benefits than non-native ones, with the exception of course, exotic invasive species, which typically are obviously non-native ones. And so that's all, but that's a whole nother category, really, more so than native versus non-native. So the key factor in I think in terms of urban forestry, the key question to ask is, you know, what's native to a 4x4 cutout in a downtown business district in Memphis or Nashville or Knoxville or Chattanooga or wherever? The answer, none. There's no tree that's native to a 4x4 cutout because it's no longer native soil. So you have to kind of, again, work with the situation and figure out what's the best species. Any other questions? Jana says, on a larger scale, how much of our global environment is affected by the destruction of trees in the Amazon? You know, remember, Jana, trees are the lungs of our planet, okay? And the Amazon rainforest happens to be a really big part of the lung, okay? It's not the whole lung. And so what I would say is our global environment is affected by a lot of different things. You've probably heard the saying, we all live downstream, right? We all live downstream from something. And I think that it's not so much that there's this one geographic place that provides a lot of benefits, because it certainly does, but there's all these other places. I mean, we can't put all our eggs in one basket. And if we're putting all our concern into preserving the Amazon rainforest and we're ignoring the forest right outside our door, I think we're doing a disservice. That's what I would say about that. Other questions? Hallie says, I find a lot of people discredit tree studies because a correlation is often stronger than true causation. How would you approach this in a conversation? I think I'd approach it by saying, name me one thing that is the cause of something. I'll wait for your answer. No, you can't do it. There's never only one cause, okay, of anything, all right? So, you know, yeah, it's a great question, Kat. So, you know, I really could stand to lose 10 pounds, right? Why do I need to lose? Well, because I like to eat, right? But that's not the only cause of why I need to lose 10 pounds. Or you take your pick about what the situation is. It's never just one answer. It's never just one cause. So I don't think there's anything about discrediting these tree studies. There are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of these tree studies. It's not, and the researchers have carefully controlled for these things and are finding the same things over and over. If you go read the Jeff Donovan study on birth weights, Hallie, that you can look that up. It's one I mentioned. It's on that list. You'll see at the bottom of that, he explains this exact thing. He explains how they controlled for all these other factors. Okay, so I think it's a matter of correlation, or I'm not even, the correlation causation is a that's an ongoing debate the researchers are always going to have. But I prefer to look at it in terms of influence. Okay, so the more I exercise, the more I influence the likelihood I'm going to lose weight. But exercise is not going to cause me to lose weight by itself, right? So again, pick your statistic. Okay, I can plant trees, and that's not necessarily going to increase the canopy cover unless I also take care of those trees, unless I water it, and so forth. Okay, I have 3 minutes before the top of the hour, so Christy, I think I'll turn it back to you.
Great. Thank you for that really interesting presentation. I'll give one final reminder that if you need credit for this and your full name is not showing, please email me. And Neil, you ready to take it away?
Yeah, Christy, I think I'm clicking all the buttons, and I agree with you. It was a super talk, Paul. I really appreciate it, and a lot of food for thought. And as for me, I think the take-home message is, from what you said, is that each day we seem to be learning more and more about how essential trees are to all of us. And as we better understand our audiences, then the better we can conform our messages to appeal to their values and interests. So it's a real challenge. It's not just informative, what you've told us, but I think it's a big challenge to each of us. So thank you very much. And I also want to thank all of you that attended the webinar. And I say this all the time, but we look to your feedback on these, critiques, suggestions on topics and speakers. We're going to continue these on a monthly basis. And we just appreciate you being a part of today's webinar.
And here's a reminder for our next webinar coming up next month with Dr. Cameron Stoddard. Please be sure to join us for that one, and we'll have the certifications ready, and the information where you can go to register is right there, tiny.utk.edu/urban forestry. Thanks, everyone. We appreciate you joining.
Thank you.